to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. Time now to turn to Ned Naylor Leyland of Gilter Cheviot Asset Management. Ned, welcome back to the Kaiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, now, Ned, my first question is that it's been shown now, a number of studies have come out, and the central banks around the world are in complete control of the price of gold. The Fed, Bank of England, various other central banks, we've seen many reports now confirming what folks at GATA have been saying for years. They have the authority to simply manage that price. It's not a free market whatsoever. Does it really matter that gold is not a free market, that is completely being set by central banks at a price that they want the price to be? Does it matter, or is there some, does it really matter?
Well, I think it matters to the rest of the market in terms of everything being priced off gold, and certainly that's.
I understand that if you say gold is the foundation upon which really the world economy is built, this is true for 5,000 years, but the forces that are keeping it manipulated or set at the way that they do, they are simultaneously creating this bubble of debt and derivatives that it's just now building to a point where it will explode, and gold will then catch up to this explosion of debt. So the fact that gold is not catching up to the debt in real time, I mean, gold used to actually track the debt in the UK and the US. As debt expanded, the gold price would kind of rise with that debt because it would kind of be the counterbalance to all that. But it stopped because they've shut it down. They've shut down gold trading, free gold trading. You don't have it. But does it matter? Because at some point when the debt blows up, then gold will just catch up in one day. You'll see gold suddenly at $5,000 an ounce one day. And then we'll be able to say, well, we told you so. But does it matter that that's not tracking in real time, that's been shut down?
Well, I think it does matter and it doesn't matter. I mean, you make a good point. And I think that gold is your hedge. It's your systemic hedge. It's the best systemic hedge. It's probably the only systemic hedge in light of what you've said. And obviously the world changed in 2009. And when you talk about central banks, I mean, obviously you have to think specifically about China and the Chinese complaint.
We'll get to China in a second. Ned, you mentioned central banks and governments have bought 477 tons of gold in 2014. The World Gold Council expects similar for 2015. The price isn't responding for the reason we just mentioned. It's being completely kept at a level that the central banks, with their infinite amount of fiat money available to them, like. But what is this telling us?
Well, I think it's to do with the fact that anywhere east of Istanbul, central banks and governments and individuals are accumulating. You could probably say that between the West, I would say US, UK sort of nexus, where they're trying to manage the price in the electronic obligation market. In Europe, they're trying to repatriate, and then east of that, they're trying to accumulate. And I think that certainly, for the time being, it probably does suit the accumulators that the price doesn't run. But the bigger issue is the one of what's happening in terms of the structural change that will allow the proper price discovery to happen. And I think there's some really interesting things going on with that at the moment. Okay, let's get into it. I see you chomping at the bit here. I think this refers to what's going on in China, correct? Yeah. Well, tell us more, Ned. Yeah, that's right. Well, look, for a long time I've spoken about this idea that we'll get an RMB denominated gold fix, and last week Reuters reported the fact that this is something which is coming this year. There's not been a formal announcement, but it's something which we're edging towards. And I think that we're in a similar situation. You've spoken, I know, before about the specialists and how they got sort of trampled over by the electronic trading platforms in the 1990s in the broader equity market. And I think what we're seeing is a similar situation evolving in gold, which is that both through the movement of the physical market to China and this change in the fix, but also in terms of this new global trading platform, which has been set up and is emerging in the background, where you'll be able to deal large volumes without going through effectively the LBMA specialists, is showing some really important changes in the structural side of the market. Okay, so just to put this into context, in other words, when I was saying at the top of the show, this interview, that the price is not being allowed to move, in other words, if somebody shows up to buy 100 tons of gold in the market, the banks are authorized to sell 100 tons or more of paper gold, essentially a naked short futures contract, for example, at that moment
to mitigate the effect of that demand. So the demand, no matter how much demand comes, it could be 5 times annual output of gold could show up at the market at any moment. Then the exact same amount of paper gold, which is essentially counterfeited futures contracts, are dumped. And in fact, they're dumped at a ratio of, in the case of the silver market, for every dollar that shows up to buy an ounce of silver, there's $50 of paper gold to try to keep silver price either at where it is or down. So you're saying this new exchange will give finally proper price discovery to properly reflect true demand. And so the RMB-based gold contract or movement is Reuters is saying it's coming this year. I know Jim Rickards, who wrote Currency Wars, tweeted about this. He's very excited. He sees it as a strategic move on a geopolitical scale, that this is the BRIC nations kind of pulling away from. Would you say that that's also part of what's going on?
Well, it certainly seems so, because if you look at the accumulation that's happening, you look, as I say, Turkey included. Turkey, there's some interesting things happening in India at the moment. Russia obviously accumulating large amounts at the sovereign level. There does seem to be something going on. I mean, what was interesting was to have noted this almost 5 years ago, that something was happening, but obviously the accumulation phase was on at that point. And it feels like now we're definitely edging towards, like in golf, they say on Saturday is moving day. It's the day where your position on the leaderboard has to really show up. And it feels like in the gold market, we're a moving day. We're at the point where we might not be on the final day, we're not on the back nine on the final day, but we're reaching that moment in the evolution of the market where it's starting to get really that much more obvious that things are afoot.
It's a bit of a posh analogy, Ned. Golf. But I hear what you're saying. In golf, if we must go down this fairway, on Saturday is when the leaderboard is updated, and so all the action that occurred up until then is not reflected in the current leaderboard. But on Saturday, it's given the current snapshot of where the true leaderboard is at that moment. So to put it in golf terms, that's what we're seeing. So in other words, there's been a lot of activity. There's been a huge accumulation. But it hasn't been reflected really in price per se. But now we're getting to a point where suddenly there's going to be this huge price discovery, and you'll see, for example, that China probably has 6,000 or 7,000 tons, not the 1,000 tons they claim.
Oh, I think at least, yeah.
That's a huge change. It could be higher than America's 8,000 tons that they claim, and a lot of people think that they've loaned that out through the bullion banks. They don't even have those tons.
Sure.
And then Russia, of course, been accumulating madly for years, and they've been doing this for a number of years. And you've been talking about this for a number of years. So the big day of reckoning is coming. Meanwhile, over there in the fiat paper world, Austria just had a bank failure. Remember, they created a bad bank to bail out Hypo Bank, and now the bad bank's gone bust. And they're requesting a huge bail-in. If memory serves me correctly, and you probably studied this over there at Cambridge or Oxford or whichever institution you were educated in, Ed, being the posh golf player that you are, wasn't it an Austrian bank that went bust that set up the prelude to the Depression of the 30s? Isn't this a replay?
Well, there's certainly a read across, isn't there? I think that the Austrians have obviously been in a lot of trouble for a while because they've lent very aggressively into the mortgage market in Eastern Europe. And so there's been a situation bubbling up for several months in Austria. But I would say in terms of Austria and gold, the interesting story was the one last week where they complained the Bank of England weren't holding their gold in fully allocated form, that they expressed serious concern that their reserves held at the Bank of England were actually not being held in the way that they had asked them to be held.
Right, so there's a lot of this repatriation movement, countries around the world asking for gold back. That's kind of a new thing. And so, but let me point this out. I mean, I'm kind of, making some jokes here. But let's be serious about it for a second. If you're in the Ukraine or if you were in Cyprus, owning gold was a lifesaver. So you're a money manager. You're in the money management business. You deal with obviously high net worth individuals, and there's a lot of money flow. But everybody across the entire socioeconomic scale, if they're concerned about the fact that the debt of this country is skyrocketing, the fiat money paper pyramid scheme is collapsing, even owning 1 ounce of gold could be a lifesaver going forward. Is that a fair statement?
Sure, of course it is, and it's also overlaid with the issue of the dollar being the world reserve currency. So people think immediately about, I must own dollars. But of course, gold is an improved, substantially improved version of hedging for the individual. And absolutely, you're right that it could well be the case that even one sovereign, which is even a quarter of an ounce, could prove to be a really important
right. So the advice that you
hedge.
give somebody with $500 million is the same for somebody with 20,000 or 10,000 pounds to their name. Once the situation starts to unravel, which it can very quickly, as you're describing, to get back to your kind of the leaderboard analogy. In other words, all of these things are percolating under the surface. There's a catalyst that enters into the market. Remember, Enron was worth $80 billion one day, and the next day it was worth zero. Gold's trading at $1,200 or $1,300 an ounce, and then we'll wake up one day, it'll be $5,000 to $6,000 an ounce for all these things that you've been talking about for years suddenly kicking in. So it doesn't matter really where you are in the socioeconomic picture. Having even 1 ounce of gold could be a complete lifesaver.
Absolutely, and think about that. So the island platform analogy we touched on before, of when the specialists were disintermediated, to use a word that you like. We're in a very similar situation because if people can suddenly transact direct without flagging up their interests to the middleman, and then you're going to immediately find a much more accurate form of price discovery. And frankly, those guys who are in the middle, who are sitting on very large levered positions, are going to be in severe need of participating back in the physical market again. So when you say $5,000 to $6,000 an ounce, I'm not against that as an idea, but really, who knows where it can go, because the denominator itself is gold, and effectively this would be really, you could argue it would be a sort of systemic failure beyond gold. It would be a proper banking system.
Right, it's like saying, what's the price of gold in the Ukrainian currency? Well, if the Ukrainian currency evaporates and goes to zero, then it was, a billion to an ounce of gold. It's an infinite number to an ounce of gold because it doesn't exist anymore.
Sure.
And the history of paper money throughout history is that every single one throughout history has always evaporated and gone to zero.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think
zero,
that's
man, zero.
That's not going to change, is it, Max? We're not going to. It's very important to say that we're not going. It's not different this time. You're not going to see the dollar buck that trend. Even Greenspan himself said that, didn't he? He said that gold is an infinitely superior currency to the dollar, and this is the ex-Federal Reserve chairman.
All right, we got to go. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for your time, Ned.
Not at all, my pleasure.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Kaiser Report with me, Max Kaiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Ned Naylor Leyland of Chief Asset Management. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Kaiser.